All right, welcome to Consumer Math. Today's date is February 4th, 2021. That does look like a 4, doesn't it? Yep, 21. It's a Thursday. Let's zoom in here a little bit. There's a very long story, and again, I haven't practiced this. I know you guys are rehearsing your speeches, and I haven't rehearsed this. I have my notes over here. It is 6 pages long, so I think it's going to take 2 days to get through. We'll see. So, did you know that the stock market almost crashed in 2008? In fact, if I pull up a random, a random stock, if it's been around for a long enough, you can see, oh wow, there's all of these stocks are like dipping down right after 2008. What happened in 2008? Almost all stocks had this mega dip, and it could have been a lot worse. Let's actually come back to the notes. Okay, so first I need to talk about mortgages. Again, mortgages. The main thing that you need to know is they are very, very big. They're hundreds of thousands of dollars. So bullet point, I'm going to type here so I like speaking more than I like writing notes. So worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're big. And if you're really, really living big, they're worth millions of dollars. The next thing that you need to know about mortgages in terms of the story that I'm telling you today is that the person who owns your mortgage doesn't actually own your mortgage in many cases. So mortgage, the owner of your, I'll call it your piece of paper, changes. So who am I picking on today? Julian. So Julian, you took out a mortgage, let's just say, keep it simple, $1 million. I don't know why you're buying $1 million house, but whatever. You have $1 million mortgage, and you are going to get your mortgage through Mr. Sindel Incorporated. I have a really awesome bank, really low interest rates, predatory lending, but whatever, we'll get to that in a sec. And I say, hey, Julian, you don't have a job. I'll still give it to you for the sake of the story. And I have your piece of paper. I own your mortgage. Woo! It's like that Monopoly card in our Monopoly deal game, right? I have his piece of paper. Guess what I can do with this piece of paper? I can sell it to anyone else. I can be like, hey, Julian's paying me like a few $100,000 or $10,000 like every month. Anyone want his piece of paper? Anyone? Oh, Gunnar, you want his piece of paper? And I give it to Gunnar and he gives me some money. I can trade his mortgage just like in that game. So it changes hands. They go to third parties. Changes to a third party. And the way that they do that in this story gets more and more complex. So I'll try to keep it as clear as possible. So by the way, traditionally in mortgages, they're hard to get. So I'll say our next little point down here. Traditionally, mortgages were hard to get. Okay, this is the story. So the way that Julian, old-fashioned Julian, would come into the bank is he'd be like, Mr. Sindel, I want money. I have a job. I have employment. I'll be like, I don't know. Like, do you make enough money at your job? How stable of a job is that? Are you actually going to be in the area? I'm going to be very rigorous in making sure that you're not going to bail out on your loan. I don't want you to default on your loan, to just give up paying it, because then I don't get your money anymore. So that started to change, though. That rigor of making sure people actually could pay back their loans started changing around 2008. Or I'll just say the 2000s in general. So traditionally mortgages were hard to get. In the 2000s, easier to get. Yeah, vocab word of the day. There's a few vocab things. Let's come and make a vocab box that we'll refer back to. Here's my vocab box. Your first one of our story, default. A-U-L-T. It's the word that you know, like by default, I go to school at 8 in the morning or something like that. In terms of a mortgage, though, if you default on your mortgage, it means you have stopped paying your mortgage. So I'm picking on Julian today. So Julian, when you stop paying it, it means you've defaulted. Me as the bank, what am I going to do? That's my house. Get out. I'm going to take your house back and I'm going to try to sell it to someone else that's not going to default on their mortgage. So default just means stop paying the loan. Stop paying loan. Or I'll say mortgage, because mortgage is a type of loan. Mortgage. And it just means that I get your house again. So far, so good. All right, so let's give more of a history. And I don't really want to write this down. This is more of you pay attention, because if I wrote down every single thing, you're going to end up taking 6 pages of notes like I am. So in the 2000s, investors in the United States and abroad were looking to make money for low risk. And you guys have heard me talk about the spectrum of risk versus reward over and over again. These people were looking for something that doesn't really exist, and they kind of existed, I guess, in this case. Low risk, high reward. What was the idea? The housing market. Even people in Europe were like, I could build houses in America. I know there's lots of Julians out there that are going to be able to pay that mortgage back. It's going to be a very steady return. If they default on their loan, they're going to be homeless. So they're very incentivized to not default on their loan. So that's the low risk and the high reward, because houses, I can make a lot of profit by just making houses and having people pay me for them. So that was the idea. Everyone is, the housing market is the place to go for low risk, high reward. It was better than what was at the time the treasury bonds. Treasury bonds in the, I want to say like the 40s and the 50s were really awesome for the return on investment. Not so much anymore in the 2000s. They're almost as much as they are today. They're like less than 2%. They're terrible. So they went to a new market, housing market. So all of these investors that used to be doing safe things are now thinking they're doing safe things again in the housing market. Turns out not so safe. All right, so the big piece of the story that I do need to write notes on is this. When you have global investors, you're thinking big dogs, like these huge corporations. They have a ton of capital, a ton of money behind them. They don't want to deal with individuals. They don't want to deal with a bunch of Julians. They want to treat them as a group of people all together. It's the equivalent of sending out a message to everyone at the same time on Parent Square. Global investors don't like dealing with individuals. I mean, I know that for some people we can be kind of painful to deal with. Like, I don't want to pay this month. Can I get an extra week? Or all these individual things that are kind of hard. So what do? They invented this thing called a mortgage-backed security. And is that a vocab word of the day? It's kind of important. I don't think it's a real vocab word. This new thing was invented. So invented. What was invented? Mortgage-backed security. And my goal today is to not lose you through all of the terminology here. And I'll try to simplify this as much as I can. How do we say this? They basically, the bank, the bank, will bundle a bunch of Julians together, and I'll share the pool of all those mortgages bundled up to those global investors. So think of this as mortgage bundle. Mortgage bundle. That's the easiest way to talk about it. A mortgage-backed security is just a mortgage bundle, which so far, that's okay. Nothing in this problem is wrong yet. I'll show you when the first domino is starting to fall. Then once you realize, uh-oh, that happened to everyone in that mortgage bundle, in that mortgage-backed security, that's a problem. Once you realize the scope of this. And when I'm talking about a mortgage bundle, I'm thinking of hundreds of thousands of these usually at a time, like big, big money. All right. So, and investors loved it, by the way. Investors gobbled up these mortgage-backed securities. And they paid a higher rate of return than investors could get in any other place. It was the best place. Obviously beating treasury bonds, but it was so good that it was like the flame for the moths. Everyone started swarming for these mortgage-backed securities because they were super secure, low risk, high reward. It was the dream. And my general rule of thumb for this entire class is, if it seems too good to be true, it is. That applies to Ponzi schemes. It applies to the 2008 mortgage or crisis, whatever we're talking about right now. Just be wary. There's no such thing as low risk, high reward. And And by the way, like what is the worst case scenario if you're, okay, who's going to be your mega rich person? Gunnar, you're a mega rich person. You're always going for the big money, right? So Gunnar, he's the one that's buying all these mortgage-backed securities. And he's thinking this, well, if Julian defaults on his mortgage, I can just sell the house and just remake back that money, and someone else will come in and take it. Not only that, but at this time, the housing market was going up. So not only would Gunnar be able to resell your house, he'd be able to resell your house at a higher price. Worst case scenario, you make money, Gunnar. That's why everyone was drawn to this, because the worst case scenario was still making a load of money. And again, that seems too good to be true. Okay. So how do we make sure that those mortgage-backed securities were okay? There is a, I don't know what they were called, but I'm just going to call them credit rating agencies. So credit rating agencies. What are they doing? They are in charge of saying, how good is that mortgage-backed security? They get to rate it. And you can get an A rating. Like you think in high school, A is the best way you can get? Well, no, you can get a double A. You can even get a triple A. Triple A, by the way, is the highest you can get in terms of a credit rating. So you can say up to triple A. Not a battery, but a rating. That is the highest rating that you can get. And guess what? They were all triple A rated because in that time, they were actually really secure. Gunnar's logic of worst case scenario, I make money, was actually true at this moment in time. Domino has not fallen yet. Mortgage debt was a good investment. I think you guys are getting the picture. This is a great thing to do if you have a lot of money, if you're like a billionaire like Gunnar. All right. So what is this? What's happening now? This is where our dominoes are going to start falling. Now, let me check. I think I forgot to uncheck someone too. Okay, go for it. So now me, the bank, is thinking, wow, I'm making a lot of money by selling these mortgage-backed securities to the Gunnar billionaires. I need to make more of those mortgage-backed securities, but they take a lot of mortgages to bundle up. So what do? I come up here and I say, you know those mortgages that are hard to get? I'm going to make them easier to get. I'm going to get more of these. I'm incentivized to give people mortgages. Who's going to be even worse than Julian? Sorry, Jenny, I'm going to pick on you. Jenny, you don't have as stable of a job as Julian. You might not even have a job. Maybe you're unemployed. But I'm just thinking, you probably will, like once you have a house, my logic is you'll try to find a job so that you'll keep that house. You don't want to lose that house. So you're more of a risky customer, but I'll still give you a house anyway. $1 million, I might go down to $800,000, which is still a ton. But yeah, I'll give you a house even though you're more risky. That's the way the banks were thinking. So the next piece in our story here is we want to say that we want more and more loans. So I'm trying to summarize this for you guys. Lenders loosened standards. And you can say that people with poor credit got big mortgages. Okay, this is the first tiny domino that has now been pressed. This is the first bad idea. But at the time, it was a good idea in the eyes of lenders, of banks, because they're still going to make just as much money off of Jenny as they were from Julian. They're just going to bundle them up. And overall, and this is, again, I've told you guys about mutual funds. The reason that mutual funds are so powerful is because it's a collection of a bunch of funds. If this one fund doesn't do good, the overall group will carry the fund up. So mutual funds are a lot safer. So if I bundle a bunch of Jennies up, sorry, Jenny, I don't mean to say you're a bad person, but like in this example, you are not so secure of a person to lend to. If I bundle a bunch of Jennies up, it's still going to be secure. That's essentially what we have for a mutual fund, right? It's still an okay idea. All right. Next piece in our story. It's a vocab word, actually. This is called a subprime mortgage. Subprime mortgage. Subprime mortgage just means mortgages to people like Jenny that had poor credit. I'll say poor credit mortgages. So a bunch of subprime mortgages started to be created, and almost purely subprime mortgages. Why? Because all of the prime mortgages, not subprime, again, sub just means underneath. So all the normal prime mortgages were used up. There's not enough people to group together normal prime mortgages. So the only thing that's going to be created from basically here on out is subprime mortgages. And you can kind of see now, everything in our story is based on these mortgage-backed securities. And once these mortgage-backed securities get rotten, and that's the base of your pyramid, the entire pyramid is going to crumble. This is the next domino. All right. So, next thing that happened, predatory lending. Practices, I should say. This is the next kind of big domino. The general way that I'm going to put this in the notes is people that clearly can't afford the mortgage. So, someone that's even worse than Jenny. Sorry, Eder. I'm just kind of going clockwise here. Or I guess that's clockwise. Eder, you don't have a job. You have your, I don't know, what's the worst possible thing that can, you don't have a job, you don't ever plan on being a job, and you're kind of honest about it, like, I just kind of like being lazy. I don't want a job. You have no money basically in your bank account. You're just a terrible person to buy a house right now. Maybe in the future you'll be a good person, but right now you're super, super risky. Me as a bank, I'm going to do this predatory lending practice where I go like, so Eder, I see you have no money, no income, you're super risky. You want a $2 million home? Yeah. I know that normally a $2 million home, like you'll have to put a down payment of a few $100,000, but you don't have that right now. You'll pay it back though, right? Right? We good? We good? All right. This is what's happening because I'm running out of Jenny's now. I have to go to Eder's. And a ton of banks, a ton of lenders started doing these predatory lending practices where it was very clear Eder's not going to pay that back. But guess what? The whole practice of I'm going to group a bunch of Eder's together. I'm going to make another subprime mortgage. And I'm going to group them together. I'm going to sell them off to those billionaire gunners. And gunners, they don't know the difference. I'm just grouping them up. They say, well, another group of mortgages comes in. I'll buy it. And the money like keeps coming in. It seems to be good so far. Although me as the bank, I'm making it more rotten because I'm incentivized to do that. I'm still making just as much money from Eder, just as much money as Jenny, just as much money as Julian. No one knows the difference yet. Why? It has to do with these credit rating agencies. So the general idea here is I'm getting less and less safe all the time. And investors are still pouring all their money in. Gunnar is still pouring all of his money into the Eders of our case. Let's uncheck. All right, time for another vocab word. It's not Call of Duty, it's not COD, it's CDO. CDO. This is an acronym that stands for Collateralized Debt Obligation. All right, so essentially, this is like insurance. It's still a loan, and I don't understand this very well, and that's why I'm kind of struggling to explain it to you guys. All you need to know is that it was sold. This is even more risky. I'll say it's like hyper risky. And the big problem with them, with all of these, with subprime mortgages, with CDOs, with everything, is credit rating agencies gave everything AAA ratings. So what's going on with the stock market at this time? It is going up and up and up. Literally, almost any stock that you buy, just wait a few months and you will have made like 3%. It was crazy. There's none of this fluctuation that's happening now. We're like, oh man, this week was a bad week. It was like almost every week was a good week in the 2000s. It was like, it seemed like a golden age. It was amazing. And everything for the housing market was also doing equally amazing. Like there was really lax requirements for lending for the banks. They're like, oh yeah, loan to whoever you want. So the government was kind of messing up in this case too. There were just low interest rates. So when you're paying back your mortgage, you're thinking, wow, my interest rate is so low, I'm basically not paying any money. Like a bunch of problems were happening here. And because of all these things that the government was doing, having low interest rates, making low regulatory practices for loans, this whole idea of let's invest into CDOs, let's invest into mortgage-backed securities, a better and better idea, drawing more and more investors to it. Okay, so let's pop the bubble. How do I want to start with this? Eventually, the editors kind of started popping this. People couldn't pay back expensive houses. And guess what? We have now used up the Julians, we have now used up the Jennies, we've now used up the Edders. So when we need to, in Gunner's philosophy, resell this house at a higher price to someone else, you've run out of people to sell to. There's no one beneath Edder. Edder, sorry, you're in this scenario kind of the worst of the worst people. Anyone that could possibly even think about buying a house, even if they didn't have income, even if they didn't have any capital, there's just no one left. Which means, yes, you have now kicked Edder out of his house, but guess what? No one is left. So when the Edders in our scenario couldn't pay back their expensive houses, that was a problem, and it kind of was getting worse and worse because now me as the bank is like, well, actually it's not me as a bank. I don't own the mortgage anymore. I bundled them up and gave them to Gunner. So Gunner in this case is like, well, I have a bunch of like empty mortgages. I'm not getting any income. What's going on? Then you start looking to the next, and it's kind of this like ice tray of events. Like it overflows from Edder. Okay, well let's get Jenny and like squeeze her a little bit tighter. Oh, she can't pay anymore. Okay, well let's squeeze Julian a little bit tighter. Oh, he can't pay anymore. And there's this cascading events, the dominoes. And that's what happened. Yeah. So by 2007, really big banks were declaring bankruptcy. 2007, really big banks were declaring bankruptcy. Say again? Wells Fargo is still around, yeah. Like any bank, essentially, that you know today was one of these big banks. So think about this. Great Depression, every single bank, you couldn't get your money back. Guess what's happening right now? Every single big bank just is declaring bankruptcy. I mean, you're insured up to $100,000 by federal government, but it's still a problem. You don't get that money immediately. All right, where are we with our story? Oh yeah, so there's a thing, this minor thing, I'll just write it in one note. There's a thing called derivatives. Think of this as the insurance on everything that's happening here, which was a good idea at the beginning because who needs an insurance on something that's never going to fail? So it was basically a way of generating free money. Well, guess what? If every single bank is like, whoa, we all need insurance, the insurance isn't going to be able to handle it. They didn't have the capital. Those failed as well. So the derivatives failed. Banks failed. Everything failed. The only thing that didn't fail was the government, luckily. I'm also thinking of the stock market at this point. You can actually bet in the stock market whether or not mortgage-backed securities are going to go up and down. And you guys heard me over and over say a ton of people were drawn to them. There was a ton of money saying it was going to go up. And when it went down, it caused panic. And everyone started pulling out. And I should really look up some of the, like a compilation of videos. It's just like every newscaster remotely connected to talk about financials was freaking out for a long time. Like every day you just turn on the TV and everyone is freaking out. We're losing so much money. It was probably like in the course of a week, which it was most critical, where people were freaking out the most, but it was scary. So basically at this point, our entire financial system is bad. We need someone to save us. I think this is the time where we need to talk about the government. Is this the time where we talk about the government? Oh yeah, I should also mention, because of how complicated everything got, we've created CDOs, we've created mortgage-backed securities. It's not the simple one-to-one mortgage. It's not just me and Julian talking anymore. Things were so complex that we don't even today know how bad things were, because the like untangling hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of these mortgages and figuring out where they belong in their groups, how bad, how rotten is that mortgage-backed security, that group of mortgages. No one even now really knows how bad it was. We just know it was bad enough to make everything fall apart. Eventually, the stock market, I think, froze. They had to just freeze it so that it wouldn't completely collapse. And saves the day, Federal Reserve. All right, Federal Reserve saves the day. Kind of. At least they prevented the 1930s happening again. So what did the Federal Reserve do? They rolled out TARP, T-A-R-P. So TARP is an acronym that stands for something. I don't even remember. Do I have it in my notes? Nope, not in my notes anywhere. But basically you need to be thinking of this as the bank bailout. They're like, the idea of TARP was, let's give the big banks, let's give Wells Fargo, let's give, like basically everything, Goldman Sachs, let's give them all a ton of money so they don't fail. Because if all of the banks fail, we will return to the 1930s of the Great Depression. We don't want that, so we're just going to pump in a bunch of money into the big banks. What does that look like from the eyes of us ordinary people? Well, it looks like they're getting free money because they are. You made risky stocks, bank. This is me as the consumer talking, not me as the banker. You made risky investments. You made it super complicated, thinking that you could invent money. It was obviously too good to be true. You kept doing it for years and years and years, made a boatload of money. And then when it all comes crashing down, instead of failing, as is the market for the United States, that's what it means to be a capitalist. And that's what it means to be make your own man. If you fail, the government bails you out and just gives you money. That's unfair. And it was, and it still is. So how much money did the government give the banks? $700 billion. Write it down. $700 billion. Call it the bank bailout, sure. I don't know what the official term is. You can call it TARP, I guess.
$700 billion collectively or $700 billion each?
Collectively. $700 billion went to banks to keep them afloat. The common phrase back then was, they're too big to fail. They're so big, they have so many investments, so diversified, that they're so big that they can't fail. Too big to fail. Well, guess what? They did. And too big to fail has another meaning. Too big to fail meaning if they do fail, they will sink the ship that is the United States economy. And to plug the holes, yeah, Federal Reserve stepped in and they gave them money to fill those holes so they didn't sink. All right. So the Treasury also helped out. They conducted stress tests by the largest Wall Street banks. Yeah, the government was obviously super upset. They were trying to figure out what was going on with the balance sheets at all these banks, trying to figure out what happened. And as I said before, they're too complicated. They had no idea what was going on. What comes next? Stimulus package comes next because the 700 billion was not enough. We need to save our sinking ship. What do? Let's pour another 800 billion in. Did I write billion twice? I did. That's kind of funny. Billion is actually quite a lot. Although that didn't directly go to banks. It did go partly to banks, but it just generally, I'm oversimplifying, it just went back into the economy. The general idea here is if we get people to stop panicking, we give little corporations, just give everyone money so that they spend, they'll stop freaking out, they'll go ahead and spend the money. It's kind of like the, what do you call it? The thing that makes your heart restart with electricity. I'm totally blanking on the term. Defibrillator. The defibrillator. It's the defibrillator for our economy. It'll shock it back into it and then keep the rhythm back. It'll go back, and that's kind of what happened. It did save us. It was a good idea, and we were saved. But it cost the government a ton of money, which we're still in debt. What are we in debt? Like $14 trillion right now? Well, guess what? 1.5 of that $1 trillion was because banks messed up. And that saved us. So we're not done yet. I want to talk about the effects. First of all, a new law was enacted. So I guess the thing I want to talk about, how do we not do this again? How do we avoid this happening? And the not so great answer is the Dodd-Frank law. The easiest way to summarize it is it did a few things. First thing, no more risks, or at least it made the risks go down. It also did this other thing, no more predatory lending. Do not lend to the Edders of our world. Sorry, Edder, this is you in the example, not you in real life. If people don't have income and they don't have money, don't give them $1 million house. You know, be smart about this. Let's make that a law. Be smart. And they did, I'm not going to write this one down, you don't need to either, but they just made it so that banks had to behave in a more predictable manner instead of trying to invent money. And this still can happen again because, in my opinion, and in many economists agree, this probably isn't enough to make them make the same mistakes. Probably not as bad, I would definitely agree with that, but it still wasn't enough. And guess what happened with the 700 billion from TARP? It was free money. It's not like a loan, like pay us back. It was just free money. So kind of sad there too. All right, so even though at the very beginning of all this, I think the key takeaway for the banks at least should have been this. Even though at the very beginning you were incentivized to make risky loans and you did profit for a while. It was like many years they were making a profit. You need to be thinking about the long term, and they weren't. They were thinking year to year. They weren't thinking 10-year to 10-year. In the long term, it did come back to bite them. And I think even all of you guys in this class can understand, if you as a system, as someone that has lots of money, decides to give a bunch of mortgages to people that can't pay them back, in the long term, that's going to come back to bite you. It's something that they didn't understand going through this. And I'm making the story a lot clearer than it was at the time because no one agency had all this information. The credit rating bureaus were all giving everything AAA ratings. So from Gunner's perspective as the billionaire worldly investor, had no idea. They didn't know that the Edders were investing. They didn't know that the Jennies were investing. They kind of assumed everyone was a Julian. I have one more page. Do I need to say anything? Oh, I love this quote. Can we write it down? it talks about the too big. This is by Alan Greenspan. He was the former FED chairman. If they're too big to fail, they're too big. Because too big to fail has a double meaning. The first meaning was, oh, well, they're too big, it's impossible for them to fail. The more important meaning through this whole crisis was they're too big so that if they fail, our entire economy is going to collapse. That's what it means, too big to fail. That's why we had to give them $700 billion to plug the holes. And I still agree with this today. And guess what? This problem hasn't been fixed. They're still the same size, the same power that they were before. What other things do I want to say before I wrap this up? That's kind of it. I wonder if there's anything I forgot. How much time do we have left? We get out at, on a normal day, fourth period at 56. So I have 2 minutes left. That's a good kind of lesson. Ask me questions. I don't know how clear that was.
What do you think is like the biggest bank?
The biggest bank? We can